A man is bleeding out on a suburban lawn. A second man's face has been torn open by human teeth. A third person is standing between them, hands shaking, having just dropped the knife she used minutes earlier. 3 people, 1 house, 1 night that started with an engagement ring and ended with a body bag. If you think you know how this story ends, stay with me, because nothing about this case is as simple as it first looks. Welcome to Buried Truth Crime. If you're new here, we post a new case file every single day, so hit subscribe now and turn on notifications because you do not want to miss what this channel digs up. And if this story grabs you in the next few minutes, drop a like before you scroll away. It costs nothing, and it's the only reason cases like this one keep reaching new people instead of disappearing into the algorithm. Now let's go to Padstow. Late at night, on the 17th of February 2017, the quiet suburb of Padstow, roughly 16 miles southwest of downtown Sydney, is torn apart by sirens. A call comes through to emergency dispatch describing a violent confrontation involving a knife. Multiple police units and ambulances race to a private residence on Watson Road. What the first paramedics find when they arrive doesn't fit any single, tidy explanation. Lying on the pavement near the front entrance is a man in his late 20s, 29 years old, with a devastating wound to his neck. He is losing blood rapidly, some of it from his mouth. The medical crew drops its equipment right there on the lawn and begins working immediately, trying to control the bleeding and stabilize him for transport to the nearest trauma unit. A few feet away, a young woman is shouting at the paramedics, begging them to move faster. She is not running. She is not hiding. She is desperate for them to save this man's life. At the same time, patrol officers sweeping the property identify a second injured person, a local man whose face tells its own disturbing story. Fresh bruising consistent with heavy blows, multiple marks across his skin, and, most unusually, several torn injuries that appear to be human bite marks. Then investigators notice the front door. It has been forced open. The lock is destroyed. Picture what these first responders are actually looking at. One man is critically injured with a knife wound to the throat. Another has been savagely beaten with bare hands and bitten. A third person is standing nearby, panicking, pleading for the first man's life to be saved. And behind all 3 of them is a door frame that looks like someone broke in. Nothing about this scene lines up. Not yet, but it will. Stick with me, because every piece of this puzzle is about to fall into place, and the story underneath it is far more complicated than a simple attack. Despite everything the paramedics do on that lawn, they cannot save him. The wound to his neck has affected major arteries, and the damage is simply too severe. He is pronounced dead at the scene without ever regaining consciousness. From this moment, Watson Road becomes an active homicide scene. Officers stretch crime scene tape around the property and shut down the street. Following standard procedure, police clear the house to make sure no other armed person is inside. There, they find 2 more women, neighbors of the woman now being detained outside. Both are visibly shaken, and both quickly become key witnesses. Officers separate the injured local man from everyone else and hand him over to a second medical team for treatment. Then their attention turns to the young woman who had been shouting at paramedics only minutes earlier. She makes no attempt to run or hide. Officers read her rights, note the blood visible on her clothing, and place her in handcuffs. She's taken to the nearest police station for an initial interview. During that first round of questioning, she gives detectives a single statement that becomes the foundation of the entire case file. In her own words, "I stepped in to help. I stabbed him. I stabbed him." That sentence leaves investigators with an immediate problem. Who was she trying to protect? How does one man end up savagely beaten while another suffers a fatal wound to the throat outside the very same house on the very same night? And out of these 3 people, who was actually the aggressor? To answer that, we have to leave Sydney behind completely and travel back several years to a completely different continent. County Wexford in the Republic of Ireland is where the story of our victim begins. His name was David Walsh. Back home, David worked as a carpenter in construction and was a father of 4. But in 2013, the life he had built in Ireland collapsed almost overnight. Police records show he was facing a string of serious criminal charges an assault against a former girlfriend, a separate assault against another local man, and most seriously, charges for using force against 3 Irish police officers. David didn't wait around for any of it to reach a courtroom. He left his family behind, bought a ticket for a long-haul flight, and disappeared to the other side of the world, placing himself well beyond the reach of Irish authorities. Once in Australia, he found steady work on construction sites. That same year, a 27-year-old Irish woman named Tina K. Hill also relocated to Australia for entirely different reasons. Unlike David, Tina had no history with law enforcement whatsoever. She arrived on a legal visa and found work with a Sydney company specializing in traffic management. And here's a detail about this case that has always stood out to me. Tina came from a town called New Ross. David came from a town called Enniscorthy. Both towns sit in the very same corner of County Wexford, roughly a 30-minute drive apart. They had essentially grown up as neighbors. And yet, back in Ireland, their paths had never once crossed. No mutual friends. No shared history. Neither of them even knew the other existed. It took more than 9,000 miles of distance and a chance meeting at a pub in Bondi Junction in 2014 for that to finally change. 2 Irish expats sharing the same accent and the same cultural background quickly found plenty to talk about. What began as a casual conversation at the bar soon turned into a serious relationship. Before long, they decided to move in together, renting rooms in the very same house that investigators would later process as a crime scene. 2 of Tina's friends moved in as well, turning the property into a shared rental occupied by the couple and their housemates. If you look at their public life from that period, everything appears completely normal, even enviable. Their social media accounts are full of photos from trips together, casual days out, wide smiles. That curated image reached its peak on New Year's Eve, 2016, when Tina and David publicly announced their engagement. In the photos, Tina shows off her ring. Both of them are beaming straight at the camera. Hundreds of congratulatory messages pour in from relatives back in Ireland. From the outside, it looks like 2 Irish transplants, despite whatever was in David's past, had built a genuinely happy life on the other side of the world. But look at those photographs next to the case file, and one question becomes impossible to ignore. How does a couple publicly preparing for a wedding end up at the center of a fatal stabbing only 5 weeks after getting engaged? How do those wide, happy smiles turn into handcuffs and crime scene tape? To understand that, we have to look past what they were showing the world, because behind those carefully chosen posts, the real picture was very different. And this is exactly the kind of case where staying subscribed pays off, because next week we're covering another file where the public image and the private reality were worlds apart. Make sure you're following along so you don't miss it. Rewind to 2015. By this point, police patrols had already become regular visitors to the Watson Road address. Neighbors were repeatedly calling emergency services over shouting matches, breaking glass, and furniture being destroyed inside the house. The records from this period describe a relationship defined by constant mutual control. According to witness testimony, David became intensely possessive, and that possessiveness quickly escalated into physical aggression. He was willing to throw punches at nearly any man who so much as looked at Tina for too long. His outbursts happened right inside their own home. During one argument, he smashed a brand new television by hurling a heavy glass bottle straight into the screen. Tina, meanwhile, later described something far less visible to investigators and far more disturbing. According to statements documented in the case file, she described repeated instances of unwanted sexual contact, telling investigators that David pressured and forced physical intimacy on her, at times while she was deeply asleep. Sit with the dynamic here for a second because it breaks the pattern most true crime cases follow. Usually there's a clear line between the person causing harm and the person being harmed. In this case, that line kept shifting. The aggression wasn't moving in only one direction. It developed into a daily cycle in which both people were causing each other serious physical harm. In September of 2015, Australian authorities finally intervened, issuing a legally binding protective order meant to keep Tina safe from further violence. But a court order on paper did nothing to stop what was already spiraling. On the 3rd of October, a housemate named Isabel Jennings heard another explosive argument and stepped into the hallway to see what was happening. Upstairs, she found David already injured, sitting on the couch with both hands wrapped around his head. At that moment, Tina slowly climbed the stairs, one hand held tightly behind her back. As she reached the couch, she suddenly leaned toward David and struck him 3 or 4 times in rapid succession around the head. Isabel later told the court that at first she assumed Tina was simply hitting him with her fist. It took her several seconds to realize Tina was actually holding a knife. Remarkably, even after that attack and the blood loss that followed, David flatly refused to call the police. He insisted Tina never meant to seriously hurt him. That refusal is exactly how these two managed to keep the worst of their relationship hidden from authorities for as long as they did. By November of that same year, another serious incident took place. Once again, Isabel came running after hearing dishes breaking and found David crying with a deep cut across his forehead. The case records describe exactly how it happened. During an argument, David threw a heavy glass candle holder at Tina. With her back turned to him, she immediately picked it up off the floor and threw it back over her shoulder, striking him in the head and leaving him with a serious wound. This time, the incident led to actual criminal charges. Tina was formally found guilty of recklessly causing injury. As part of her sentence, the court ordered her into a mandatory rehabilitation program lasting several weeks, specifically designed for people with a history of aggressive behavior in relationships. And in a major development, David was granted his own protective order against Tina. So by early 2016, we have 2 people with active protective orders against each other. Both had used knives. Both had used heavy household objects and their bare fists during confrontations. Both had repeatedly suffered serious injuries at the other's hands. And these are the exact same 2 people who just over a year later would be posting those joyful engagement photos online for family and friends to celebrate. So what actually triggered the final fatal outbreak of violence on that February night? And how did a completely unrelated stranger end up beaten and bitten outside their front door? To trace that, we need to rewind just a few hours before those sirens ever sounded. Late on the evening of the 16th of February, sliding into the early hours of the 17th, Tina, David, and their 2 housemates head out for a night across several bars in Sydney. Investigators later reconstruct their movements almost minute by minute. The group first arrives at a pub inside the Grand Hotel. After drinking there for a while, they take a cab to a second bar at the Doncaster Hotel. That's where another argument erupts between Tina and David, fueled by alcohol. The fight splits the group apart. David walks out alone while Tina and the other women stay behind. But David doesn't go straight home. Instead, he heads to a third location that night, the Coach and Horses Hotel, and only after more drinking there does he finally catch a ride back to Watson Road. When he reaches the front porch, he realizes he doesn't have his keys. Instead of waiting or calling someone, he kicks the front door open. The same broken lock investigators will later examine closely at the scene. Once inside the empty house, David doesn't go upstairs to bed. He simply lies down on the living room couch and falls asleep. Meanwhile, Tina and the other women continue their night out. At a nearby table, they meet a local man named Matthew Hyde, who has absolutely no connection to any of the couple's history. As the group talks, Matthew takes an interest in one of Tina's friends, a woman named Grace. When the bars begin closing for the night, the women decide to head home and invite their new acquaintance along. Matthew accepts, hoping to spend more time with Grace. Here is the detail from that night that has always struck me the most. When the group arrives back at the house in the middle of the night, they find the front door badly damaged and the lock completely broken. Think about what most people would do in that moment. Call the police immediately, assuming an intruder had broken in. Instead, this group simply steps over the damage and walks inside. None of them stop to consider that the broken door isn't evidence of an outside break-in at all. It's the direct result of David's own outburst, hours earlier, after being left behind on the other side of the city. Tina, Grace, their third friend, and Matthew walk down the hallway, talking loudly, laughing, making no effort to stay quiet. Their voices carry through the entire ground floor, and that noise instantly wakes David on the couch. He opens his eyes, sits up, and focuses on the people who have just walked into his living room. The very first thing he sees is a man he has never met, standing close to Tina. What happens next defies any normal standard of behavior. David doesn't ask who Matthew is. He doesn't ask why the women brought him home. He wakes up, sees a total stranger standing near Tina, and reacts instantly. "Who the hell are you?" he shouts, charging forward. He lands a heavy blow on Matthew from behind, immediately knocking him off balance and sending him to the living room floor. From that point, the confrontation spirals completely out of control. David gets on top of Matthew and repeatedly strikes him with his fists. He grabs Matthew by the hair and forces his face into the floor. During the struggle, David even bites him across the face. The exact injuries officers will notice within the hour, injuries unusual enough to immediately raise questions once police arrive at the scene. Trying to pull a man that size off someone proves nearly impossible. Tina rushes in to help Matthew, grabbing David by the arm and shouting at him, trying to explain one simple fact. This man came home with Grace. He has absolutely nothing to do with her. David doesn't listen. Without even turning around, he swings his arm backward with enough force to knock Tina off her feet. She gets straight back up and steps into the fight again, this time throwing a punch of her own, hitting David directly in the face. He shoves her away and raises his fist as if preparing to strike back. Grace joins in too, pulling at David, trying to get him off Matthew, who is already visibly injured. When Tina realizes they cannot stop this with their bare hands, she makes the decision that will permanently change every life in that room. She turns and heads for the kitchen, pulls open a drawer, and takes out a large knife. The other women see what she's holding and beg her to calm down, to not do something she can't take back. But investigators later document exactly what she says in response. "No, he needs to be taught a lesson. It's not fair. Look at poor Matthew." With that, Tina walks back toward David, who is still holding Matthew down on the floor. She makes one quick motion with the knife toward David's neck, then immediately pulls it away and drops it onto the floor. The fight stops almost as suddenly as it started. David releases Matthew. The injury has affected a major artery, and he begins losing strength rapidly. Then comes one of the strangest details in the entire case, something patrol officers specifically note in their reports later. One of the witnesses, clearly in shock, inexplicably hands the badly injured David a mug of tea. Almost automatically, he takes it from her. Seconds later, he manages to say, "Call an ambulance." He turns, walks out through the broken front door, crosses the lawn, and collapses heavily onto the pavement. That is the exact scene emergency crews walked into that night. And now it finally makes sense. Why one man had serious bite injuries, why another was lying outside with no strength left, and why a third person was standing nearby in handcuffs. What remained was the trial, where the findings of medical and psychiatric examinations would become the deciding factor in everything that followed. In October of 2018, Tina Cahill appeared before the Supreme Court. Prosecutors initially charged her with intentionally taking David's life. Matthew Hyde was cleared of any responsibility entirely, remaining in the case solely as the injured witness who survived that night. But before the main trial began, the case took a significant legal turn. The defense presented the court with findings from an independent psychiatric evaluation. Doctors formally diagnosed Tina with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and major depression, both attributed to years of repeated physical violence within the relationship. Based on those medical findings, the judge allowed the case to proceed on the lesser charge of manslaughter. The trial itself became an intense clash between two grieving families. David's relatives pushed for the maximum possible sentence. His former wife argued publicly that the post-traumatic stress diagnosis was simply a convenient excuse. David's brother told the court that their father never recovered from losing his son and died of grief 10 months later. The defense responded with cards in which David had apologized for physically hurting Tina and promised he would change. They also presented testimony from Tina's previous partners, who confirmed she had shown no history of aggressive behavior in any earlier relationship. After weighing all of the evidence, the court concluded that aggression had existed on both sides of this relationship and that Tina had not originally set out to take David's life. The final sentence handed down was 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5. When I look at cases like this one, I keep coming back to the same question. Why do people stay inside relationships this destructive until there is no way back? This case stands as a harsh example of what happens when a damaging relationship is allowed to continue for far too long, eventually pulling in the lives of people who had nothing to do with it at all. After serving the minimum portion of her sentence, Tina was released in February of 2022. Australian authorities immediately deported her back to Ireland, back to the county where this entire story first began, and where two strangers who grew up 30 minutes apart never should have had to find each other 9,000 miles from home to end up here. If this case stayed with you, that's exactly why we do this every single day. Subscribe to Buried Truth Crime, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment below telling me whether you think 8 years was justice or nowhere near enough. We'll see you in tomorrow's case file.